Building the fabric from the ACI APIC. So let's go into the action now. Let's build our first ACI fabric. When we first boot up the APIC, there's going to be an interactive command line based wizard. It's going to ask us a couple of questions in order for it to build the fabric. So one of the questions that it's going to ask is the infrastructure VLAN. And let's explain what an infrastructure VLAN is. It's basically a VLAN that is just going to be used for internal communication between the ACI fabric components, the APIC, the leaves, and the spines. So the infrastructure VLAN is basically a VLAN that is used for internal communication. It's something that you're not going to be working with on your production environment or your tenant networks. It's just a VLAN that allows internal communication for any ACI related operation. Usually by default, it's going to ask you to set on the 3967 or 4096 space. I usually leave it as a default unless you have a specific reason why you cannot use the default addressing that it's provided during the setup. Okay, the VTAP addresses. The VTAP addresses, it's 10.0.0/16. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to assign a VTAP address on the subnet that you specify. So let's say, and this is just me making an arbitrary number, it's going to allocate a particular IP for encapsulation, decapsulation. So all my tenant traffic, it will land onto this particular address. So my spines are going to advertise any information via the VTAP address. So if, for example, we have a server here, this server has an IP of 10.20.0.10, and this is leaf 1, and my leaf 1 VTAP address is 10.0.0.1. Spine 1 is going to advertise a route in order for you to go to the endpoint of 10.20.0.10. Please send it to the VTAP address of 10.0.0.1. So this is what it's asking. What subnet do you want to allocate so we can then assign IPs to individual leaves or individual ACI component? Multicast address space. So the multicast address space, and let me go ahead and draw, because this one will require a little bit of drawing so you can understand a little bit better. Multicast. It is used to announce BUM traffic. And you might say, well, what is that? It stands for broadcast, unknown unicast, and multicast. And basically what it is that instead of me flooding, because at this point, if you remember on section 1, we mentioned that this is strictly layer 3. There's no broadcasting happening in the spinal leaf layer. There is absolutely no broadcasting happening. Every single arrow that you see there is purely layer 3 traffic. So I need to somehow announce what I've learned on my leaf. So what endpoint is connected to my leaf, and I need to announce its MAC address, its IP, etc. So this is considered the BUM traffic. The information from that endpoint that is connected onto the leaf is the BUM traffic. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to allocate a multicast group to announce that information across my fabric. Let me show you how that works. You're going to be asked to provide a multicast address space. And what it's going to do is going to assign an available IP inside this group to every single endpoint group that I create on the fabric. So let's say I build an endpoint group called A, and then the fabric automatically assigned 224.0.0.10. Each leaf is going to listen and also announce their end devices connected over EPGA. So if I'm assigning a device to be part of EPGA and it's connected on leaf 1 will announce this BUM information using this multicast group, and all the other leaves which are listening on the same group are going to be able to get that information. And this is basically a star, G. Star, I am the source, which in this case is leaf 1, and my group is leaf 2 and leaf 3. So basically what it's going to do is going to use this group to announce all my broadcast, unknown unicast, and multicast in the VXLAN fabric. And don't worry, we don't go deep into the multicast aspect of bump traffic or the announcement of multicast and bump traffic. We just go straight into the tenancy and to the overlay. So now that we discussed multicast address space, finally the management network. And this is basically what address I am going to assign to each leaf and each spine for management access. And when I mean management access, let's say for some reason I need to connect to leaf 3 to look at some particular config in this particular leaf. So with this management address, I can do an SSH into the CLI, or I can do an API call. So it's basically talking to the leaf. And by the way, API is done on the APIC, but I'm just giving you a scenario. If you need to connect straight to a leaf, you do that via command line connecting via SSH, and it's through the management network. And you have two ways of doing it. You have your in-band network. You can assign the in-band network address space, and you also have an out-of-band management network. You can also assign that particular subnet. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to the show. Let's build that APIC. Let's configure the APIC for the first time. Okay, so what you see in front of you is what APIC looks like when you first boot it up. So basically what you see here is a console screen, or I would say the APIC shell. When you turn on that APIC and you plug a monitor and keyboard, you're going to initialize the APIC via this particular menu. So the first thing that is going to ask, how do you want to name your fabric? You can type any information as, production DC1, whatever you want. So you just want to label that as the fabric name, okay? In this case, we just want to leave it default, so we're just going to use the same ACI fabric 1. We'll just press enter. So it's asking us for the fabric ID. How many fabrics do I have? If I have multiple ACI fabrics, you want to make sure that what's the fabric ID on this particular ACI that build that you're currently performing. We're just going to leave it in 1. Now it's asking us how many controllers do we have in the fabric. And when it's talking about controller, it is referencing to the APIC. Okay, so this will be the amount of APICs that you have. In this case, we're going to select 3. Okay, pod ID. If we're managing multiple pods, and a global ACI fabric. So if we have a big ACI fabric and we have multiple pods inside, and again, I am going to draw on our next section a quick diagram so you can see what I'm talking about. You can have multiple pods inside the same fabric. It's going to ask us what the pod number is going to be. So in this case, it's our first pod in the fabric. So we're just going to leave it as 1. And it's also asking us, is this a standby controller? Which means that I already have an APIC up and running. If it's standby controller, we have to type yes. And once it communicates to the fabric, it's just going to join the cluster. And the APIC, the primary or the active APIC, is just going to write the config to the standby. And this will be a standby. But in this case, this is our first, and this basically will be no. Controller ID. This is our first APIC. So chances are you're going to type 1. So this is our first APIC that we're configuring. And there you go, controller name. In this case, that's the controller name which is shown on the web interface. We're just going to leave it in APIC 1 because that's our first APIC. And now, you remember the VTAP address? It's actually asking us for that TAP address. And if you remember previously, I typed the 10.0.0.0/16, so that's what I'm talking about here. This is the address pool that is going to be used to allocate individual IPs for each VTAP. Infrastructure VLAN. And it's not going to be used anywhere in your environment. So you got to make sure that whatever number that you assign here is not in use for anything else, okay? This is strictly for cluster communication purposes, nothing else, okay? We're going to change this to 494. That's our last available VLAN ID in this range. Now the multicast address. So this will be your bridge domain multicast address in which I am going to advertise either my MAC information or my IP information for all my end devices plugged into the fabric. And it's actually auto-assigning 225.0.0/15. You can change it if you want. I usually leave it in default. Now it's asking us for the out-of-band management interface config. Do you want to enable IPv6? We're not using IPv6, so we're just going to press enter. Now it's asking us for the IPv4 address. And in this case, I can assign anything I want that is available. So in this case, let me assign something that it's pointing on my management network, and I would assign 28. Let's do 28, and it's going to be /24. So that will be my management interface or my management address in the out-of-band management network for this APIC. Press enter, and now it's asking me what's the default gateway on that management network, and it's going to be 10.10.21. Press enter, interface, and this is the management interface in the server itself. We just leave it in auto. That's the interface speed. And it's asking me, do you want to use strong password? Of course. Press yes, press enter. Let's type the password. I'm just going to use the complex password here. Let's retype the password. Boom. So now it's asking me, hey, after you commit this, the VTAP address pool, the infrastructure VLAN ID, and the multicast address pool cannot be changed. So you got to make sure that you configure this correctly, or else you have to reset the APIC, okay? Would you like to edit the configuration? We're just gonna press no, or press enter because it's already no. And now it's basically configuring the APIC. Once this is done, it's gonna take roughly, I would say like 6 or 7 minutes, and we should have the web interface available for us. And we just point to the management IP that we assign on this setup. And there you have it. I have the APIC configured and booting up. So now I just need to wait a couple of minutes, and I should get the web interface enabled and available for my management purpose. Okay, everyone, in our next video, we're going to take a look at the Fabric Inventory hardware membership. Thank you for watching.